Yeah, welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. The Legendino is in Rio with a touch of the lurgies. Legendino?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good job that I got you back.
Yeah. Round, going around. It's going around. Unfortunately.
Well, let's start with that one and let's introduce everybody to our guest this week. Do you know, I've been looking online and he is only the second most famous Stoke City supporter. The second. Can you imagine if you're the second? It's like being Buzz Aldrin, isn't it?
Hey, seconds right after first.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. Nick Hancock, welcome to the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast.
Delighted to be here. Who's
you-
the most famous then?
Believe it or not, and Tim won't like this because it's a cricketer. You probably
Oh,
know
it's
who
Shah.
Sorry?
Oh, it's Shah.
Dominic Cork.
Oh, Dominic Cork, right.
Yeah,
Okay,
he's more
enough.
famous.
Yeah.
But the good news is you're more famous than Slash from Guns N' Roses, who I knew about. You are more famous. You're actually more famous as a Stoke City supporter than Sugar Ray Leonard, who, well, the jury's out on whether he's a genuine supporter, but he was seen at the stadium with a Stoke City shirt on.
He certainly was. Yes, Stoke fans are very good at co-opting members into their following, who never go to games and have no interest in it at all. They just, but are very happy to accept a free shirt, which is apparently all you need to do.
Nothing's free in this game, you know. That shirt marks you for life. Was my experience as an 8-year-old. But anyway, let's leave that to one side. You do a podcast of your own, don't you, Nick?
Yeah. Yes, I do a podcast called The Famous Sloping Pitch, which is, I'm not going to say as much the same as this, but it's two old blokes banging on about football. So, and basically, it's sort of, it resents the Premiership, put it that way. It doesn't like all the mucking around that's going on, and Saudi involvement and all that sort of thing. So it's just two old blokes moaning.
Shall we go back then to the 4th of March, 1972?
Yes, let's
do that.
4th of March, 1972. Was this the greatest day in the history of Stoke City Football Club, one of the founding members of the Football Association?
Well, if you're going to start measuring the great days by success, then yes. But I think you'll find when you support a team like Stoke, really, the great days tend to be like Grimsby away on a Tuesday night when you're not expecting it to be great, and you fall into some strange pub and you just have a great trip. But yes, I mean it's the most illustrious day, I suppose, because it's the only major honour that we've ever won, and I was there.
And you were 9 or 10 years old at the time?
Yeah, I was 9 years of age. It's the first time I'd ever been to London. Is one of my strong memories. And I remember coming down Finchley Road, and every time I saw a big house, asking my dad, "Does Bobby Moore live there?" That was my answer. I was convinced that he must have lived in one of these big houses.
Did you refer to it then as that London?
That there London, yeah, absolutely. Down that there London,
that's
absolutely.
A bit further north than Stoke City, you'll find, Mr. Vickery, that there London. Do you not think?
Well, no, it's certainly a phrase that my friends will use. Yeah, that there London.
Okay. But
I don't think there's any sort of. It's not like a different language, is it? I don't think there are any rules that say you can't use it if you live below a certain level, on the globe.
There are certain rules, and when it comes to football, there are rules upon rules upon rules, as we know. So we're looking at the 4th of March, 1972, when the football firmament was, I think, in any case, solidly working class. I think it's an important factor in this. It may not be for you. We'll come on to that in a moment or two. But also where there was an innocence about it, wasn't this? Is a League Cup final at Wembley, 4th of March 1972, Chelsea versus Stoke City. When I say Chopper Harris was the captain of Chelsea, many people will run for the hills. But that shows you what era we were in, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, the spine of their side was the 1970 FA Cup winning side, which was basically a small war fought between Leeds and Chelsea over 2 games. So but they had some sublime players too. Of course, Alan Hudson, who later came to Stoke, and Chris Garland, and several others. But yes, it was. I think we were very much the. We were a long way from being favourites, put it that way. And at what stage
could you say in this one, Nick? Could you say, "I'll see if it's a poker game. I'll see your Ron Harris, and I'll raise you Alan Bloor"?
Well, during the game, I think we did a lot more of the more cynical fouls. I know, remember Chris Garland being.
Alan Bloor would have been walking very, very early, wouldn't he?
If it was today. I think in those days, and that all defenders were cynical. We had Dennis Smith, Mike Pedgick, Alan Bloor, and John Marsh, all of whom are perfectly capable of breaking a leg without really looking. I think Chelsea had McCready and Harris, didn't they? And Dempsey and Webb, I think, were the back four for Chelsea. All again, you'd fancy they beat you in a fight. So I think that was the nature of defending in those days.
I really wanted to have a look at this game because I think it's important on so many levels, and I don't think it's talked about enough. There are so many things from this game. This is the end of that Chelsea, isn't it? That Chelsea that won the cup, that beat Real Madrid, another game which
Tottenham
I think
in the cup, didn't they?
In the semi-final.
They beat Tottenham in the semi-final. That's right, because everybody was going on about how this was going to be an all-London final because they obviously thought West Ham were going to beat us in the semi-final, and it was Tottenham or Chelsea, but that didn't quite.
So it's the end of Chelsea, and then Chelsea go into years of decline afterwards. It's the title for Gordon Banks. It's the title for George Eastham, who is just a fantastic story. You've got Peter Dobing, who probably the last pipe-smoking footballer to grace the game. And you've got a club like Stoke, who I kind of think should be bigger. If clubs like, say, Nottingham Forest have had glory days, then why haven't Stoke ever been quite up there? Why have you been relegated to following the lads to the likes of Grimsby?
Well, I mean, I think, in terms of Forest and Derby, both of whom won the league in the 70s, you're talking about Brian Clough, and that's just that's a unique set of circumstances when you get Clough in his good times, and he took both Derby and Forest up. And then won the league with them. So I think that was a great great bit of fortune that they had in just appointing the right manager, and it is incredibly important to have the right manager. And funny enough, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, and I was saying, I reckon that about 2/3 of managerial appointments end in failure. I think if you get one right every fourth appointment, that's not a bad record. I mean, of course, if you're Watford, that can happen within a week. But you know what I'm saying. That strange alchemy, that chemistry of the players respecting their manager, the manager working within the constraints of the club youth system, etc. That conflagration is I think is a pretty rare thing.
But you lot had Stanley Matthews once upon a time, as you well know, arguably for my generation, certainly the greatest British footballer that there had been previously, before George Best anyway, for my generation. And you'd have thought that was your bit of luck, the equivalent of having a great manager.
That's certainly true. And Stan played for Stoke in 2 incarnations. So the young Stan, which was up until the war, and then he went to Blackpool because that's where he'd been stationed in the war and he quite liked it. So the season before the war started, we lost the title on the last day when we needed to win at Sheffield United. And then we lost it, I think I'm right in saying, on the last day of the first post-war season. And obviously, we melodramatic football fans, if anybody wants to know why we're not more successful, I blame Adolf Hitler, because basically we should have won between those two tapes, but there was no football being played. But that's typically melodramatic, obviously.
Well, okay, back to this match. What do you remember about it as a 9 or a 10-year-old on the 4th of March, 72?
It's strange, isn't it? Because the amount of people who talk about like their first games and actually get them wrong, if you look it up, it's a different result, and that player didn't score. But the things I remember about the day was obviously being in London was very exciting, and silly things like shops being open after 6 o'clock. Being able to go out and get an ice cream at 9 o'clock at night. These are the things that obsessed a young boy, because, as far as I was concerned, because this was like the second season that I'd started going. And we'd been in the FA Cup semi-final already, and we were in the League Cup final. We were in the FA Cup semi-final again the year after, and I clearly thought this was what it was going to be like. This is what you do: you start the season, and then at the end, you get very close to winning something, or you win something. Clearly, that wasn't the case. So the really weird thing is the things that I remember have got nothing to do with the game. So I remember coming out of the ground and going on the tube. That was exciting to me. And somebody saying that Leeds had beaten Southampton 7-0. I don't know why that stuck in my mind, but it was that very famous game. I don't know whether you remember them doing all the keepy-uppies and keeping the possession. It was quite a famous game. And the other thing that always makes me laugh so much now, when it's still the last trophy we won, and we're 50 years on, is I remember my dad coming out with me and then just wait a minute, and stopping by the bridge on Wembley Way and writing on the programme, Stoke won 2-1, Conroy and Eastham, as if he was going to forget that. If that wasn't going to be the most important result in my whole lifetime. But he felt, now better just put that down there, because by the time we're on the train tomorrow, we might not have remembered.
Of course, there was a goal in between.
Might have been a dream, So
I suppose so. I suppose
it really happened.
You're quite right. Actually, and I remember that was quite interesting, because I was 9, and so and my dad was making sure, he said, like, don't wander off, do this, blah 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 blah. And then I remember taking my dad to the Euro '96 semi-final, and I was saying exactly the same things to him. It was that beautiful, twist around. He was not as comfortable in the situation as I was, and so I was saying, don't wander off, or now let me get your programme. You just wait there, don't go wandering. And it's actually rather lovely in a way, isn't it, to be able to return that compliment, if you like.
Yeah, that is life. I was going to say that there was a goal in between by the majestical Peter Osgood, who. He's got to be one of the great legends from this era, king of the King's Road, as they called him in those days. At that point, even as a 9-10-year-old, were you concerned?
No, I don't think I was, because we weren't going to Wembley to watch the League Cup final. We were going to Wembley to watch Stoke win the League Cup final, and I just had that absolute confidence about it. And we played so many cup games, because we played 2 replays as well as the 2-legged semi-final against West Ham. But we'd also played Arsenal in the FA Cup semi-final replay, and we had up to that point lost 1 game, which was the Arsenal replay. So I had good reason to feel that everything was going to be okay.
Sure.
What's the relationship? Because when everyone thinks of Stoke, you think about the Potteries.
Yeah.
What's the relationship between Stoke as an industrial city and the club, and the passing of the industrial age? How's that affected the club?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the key thing. Probably in 1972, there would have been a couple of thousand more pot banks in the city than there are now. You know, the industry is very much a small craft industry rather than, you know, than the National Coal Board or British Steel or whatever. It's lots of little pot banks, but of course they've all kind of gone. I remember, the only thing I do remember about talking about the link, and I'm sure this is an observable phenomenon, but that productivity went up in the city quite sharply after we won the League Cup, and people wanted to be at work because they could talk about how we'd won the League Cup, and happy workforce supposedly is a productive workforce. So it's always, it's a strong link. But as you say, we're now in a post-industrial age, so you can't imagine that productivity in a distribution center is going to go up massively when it just involves.
Does that make the club? Does that make the club even more important these days?
Yeah, I think it does, because there are fewer things that bind you. Most cities. I'm just checking that I've got this right. I'm going to go for a lot of cities. We're known for one particular industry. You've got your shoemakers and your hatters and your cobblers and all of that stuff. So then, because so many people don't work in the same industries, and they don't go to pubs anymore, really. The football club is the only place where that sense of commonality comes. This is where we go on a Saturday. This is who we are. I mean, obviously there is another club in Stoke-on-Trent, but and they're probably actually, probably even more so at Port Vale than at Stoke. So yeah, I think it's interesting that and that's why football clubs do a lot of community stuff now, don't they? They're in schools and visiting hospitals and providing training for young kids and things like that. So it's important.
I remember being at a Stoke game a few years back at Tottenham when Stoke came down, and the support was just fantastic. And the support was magical. And it was a time when there was a Spanish player, and not particularly glamorous Spanish player there, called Mark Musiala. And they had this chant going, Munesta, that's right,
Muniesa,
they had this chant going to La Bamba, Mark Muniesa, and it was it was just surreal and funny. Yeah. And it was fucking brilliant,
Yeah. I mean, I think, that's interesting, because I think I don't find football as funny as I used to. It was as much of a pleasure to shout something in the away end and get a laugh as to win the game. But now and so many different songs, but now they all tend to be the same bloody tune, It's just not as interesting. And I really think something's been lost there, that freedom to start a song, and they have this wonderful organic nature about them. Songs at the football grounds is you either catch people's imagination or you don't, and when you do catch people's imagination, it goes, it's the Leak song or whatever it is that Chelsea have, Celery, that sort of thing, which try and find the derivation of it. It's quite difficult, but it has a life of its own all of a sudden, and I think that's a really good thing.
And it's weakened by the loss of community.
Yeah, I think it's weakened by the loss of community, but it's also weakened by the incredible po-faced, this is the most important thing in your life, whataboutery that people have about football, and just say, he used to say it to my dad, he used to say, I I don't want to know about the bank account. That should mean nothing to me. I should be able to turn up on Saturday and only think about the match from 11 o'clock, and I know where it's going to be and I know when it's going to be finished, and that I don't want to live it 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And people do, they absolutely do. And of course that's got to take some of the joy out of it, because you've identified yourself so closely with the team that anything less than a comfortable win is a reflection on you somehow, if you know what I mean. So I think there's just a bit of fun has gone.
I think a lot of fun has gone.
Yeah,
a lot of fun has gone out of the game. I think there are similarities though between Stoke and Chelsea. Any Chelsea fan will tell you it ain't like it used to be. When I was 11, 12 years old, I'm not a Chelsea fan, but when I was 11, 12 years old, going to Stamford Bridge had a little bit of the anarchic about it. It's a very working class crowd at that point, and that certainly has been lost out of it. I think also the area, because even though Chelsea was always on the edge of a very expensive area, but you go west from Stamford Bridge and you start seeing, oh, actually, there's a working class community here, but which Brentford kind of absorbed after a while. But what I was thinking about with regards to this is, and I do remember the scenes when Chelsea won the FA Cup, that the crowds came out. They did the old-fashioned double-decker open-top bus tour of the area, as did Stoke City when you won this League Cup. And there are pictures available of the crowds turning around. I mean, it's amazing what Tim says about your fans or the spectators. It's just quadrupled or tenfold when you see the amount of people that turned out for Stoke. And I understand it was quite a long trajectory. They did the whole town, didn't they? So
but it's because the city is actually 6 towns. It's quite a complex sort of setup. It only became a city as these towns grew towards each other, and so from one end to the other, through different communities, and all of whom you have to visit, because otherwise it's always going to be, why weren't you in such and such? But that bus just looks so old when I look at that. I feel like the game was yesterday, but the bus is clearly from another era.
Were you there? Were you there on that day?
No, I mean, it was the day after. It was literally the day after. It was the morning after, and so I was still down there. Yeah.
In that London.
This idea of down that there London, yeah. I was looking,
paying those prices,
prices. Exactly so. I was down there knocking on doors and asking if Bobby Moore was in.
Londoners have got to eat as well, Tim. If we have to pay those prices, why not people from Stoke?
Who was the idol of the 9-year-old Nick Hancock?
Jimmy Greenough. I think he was my first great heartthrob, for want of a better word. He was
a fantastic player. It's a travesty he never played for England, and his brother did.
Yeah. He was a wonderful player, and I still see him. at the Stoke games. He comes and sits near where I sit. So him, and then Terry Conroy obviously gets an honourable mention, and then later, ironically, considering we're talking about this game, Alan Hudson was he was fantastic. Always a good question to ask Chelsea fans, of course, is what was Blue is the Colour celebrating? And Blue is the Colour was released for this League Cup game. It wasn't anything to do with the FA Cup or the Cup Winners' Cup. It came out for this one.
Yeah, I remember it very well. It's in the charts, isn't it? And we're going to look at the charts in a moment or two. It's quite high up in the charts as well. So you can imagine how that permeated throughout the sort of football landscape, because it was a song that went beyond Chelsea. What I remember most about that song, I think I said it last night on air, actually, that I remember there was blue paraffin and pink paraffin. Those are the two options. and
SO Blue, yeah.
SO Blue did, they
Yeah.
used blue as the color in the same way that the New Seekers used, the Coca-Cola used the New Seekers. I'd like to teach the world to sing. So we thought of it more than about Chelsea. The match ended with both sides looking as if they had run 2 or 3 marathons. This was
I think George Eastham did. And the amount of ground that he covers, and he's an old man,
Yeah. I know, but it always makes me laugh because, of course, I think the commentary actually says he's done it. The old man has done it.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, he was like 34, I think.
Something like that. Yeah.
He was. The sense was that he was like.
Well, there are a couple of things though, and he went so far back, and he's the player, and all players owe George Eastham a huge debt because he took on the retain and transfer system. He did. He took that on, and he wouldn't back down, and he took it all the way. And there's also the thing that he kind of retired.
And he'd gone to South Africa.
He'd gone to South Africa. And see, I remember this game really, because this is the first season that I followed. There was a referee's crackdown this season.
Yes, tackles from behind.
The tackle from behind, and it's because of the crackdown that Tony Waddington called him back from South Africa. And he said, look, you can play now. They're not going to break you. So, and it's him who scores, who ends up scoring the winning goal. It's such a great story. And Gordon Banks as well. Go on, Nick.
Yeah, Gordon Banks.
No. I mean, yes, the Eastham story was... But that was one of the great things about the wrapping of mythology around cup finals. Every cup final has a couple of 3 stories. Not so much now, but it was Paul Allen was the youngest player. Oh, look, Bobby Moore's playing against West Ham every year. Oh, little Bobby Stokes. Who was the lad who scored? Roger Osborne scoring for Ipswich, and found it so emotionally draining. He hardly ever played again. He was. Do
you know who had George Eastham as a childhood idol?
I'm going to say one of the Clash.
Mick Jones. That's right. Mick Jones out the Clash. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Well, I know that because Danny Baker told me that, and I'll tell you why. He said to me, and I know exactly what the game was. Stoke were playing Bristol City in the League Cup game, and it was Shilton's last game, which is why Chris Woods ended up playing in the League Cup for Forest. Okay, all of these things fit together. Danny was in the bar in the hotel with Mick Jones, and Mick Jones said, "Don't tell anybody this, but you see that bloke over there? He's my hero." And it was George Eastham who was managing Stoke at the time. And so, funnily enough, I'm so glad you asked that.
Yeah, there you go. That's because George Eastham played a lot of his career in mid-60s for Arsenal when they were crap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can see where his allegiance lies. There is a lot around this game, though, that leaves me thinking it's another era. You kind of said it a couple of times, Nick, when you were talking about, the fun has been lost. When you talked about the FA Cup there,
the fun and the professional fouls.
Thank goodness for that. Yeah,
and indeed heading the ball correctly. I just got him to have gone.
But these cup finals were for kids, I think. I mean, maybe it's because I was a kid at the time, but when you talked about all the stats that they give you beforehand, I always remember cup final day being on a Saturday and dominating the whole weekend.
Absolutely.
Dominating
there would be there'd be cup final versions of different programs, wouldn't there? There'd be cup final question of sport.
There would be, and building up to
final weather.
They were talking to us kids. The games got so kind of like professional and serious, and I can't see the kids getting into a cup final in the way that they will. I'm not saying kids don't follow football. Of course they do. What else would they follow? But I don't think the cup finals mean as much. League Cup final doesn't mean.
Well, and the League Cup final didn't even then. It wasn't live on TV.
Oh, it
for example.
Did for us, mate, because that was one of the games you could always get a ticket for.
Tottenham won it the year before and the year after. But I don't remember them as huge things. But this particular one I do, because I think it's the end of the great Chelsea. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a title for Gordon Banks. And a
Well,
title
and the
for
Gordon
Stoke.
Banks, yeah, and the Gordon Banks thing, of course, is fascinating because it was only a month into the next season that he had his car crash.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he saved a penalty in the semi-final to get them to Wembley.
Jeff Hurst.
He'd lost before at Wembley with Leicester in 1963. You know, and then he had his car crash, and I'm the day after playing at Liverpool at a game that I went to. You know, and that was, I suppose it still would be, but it was a massive news. I mean, I remember
was
that.
huge.
I thought
Yeah.
you'd mention him when I asked you who your big idol was. I thought Banks
Yeah.
would be on the list.
I think, you know, probably because I was 9, you're less sophisticated in your appreciation of what's going on. Your first one tends to be a striker. I'm afraid. I hate it, you know, but it just does tend to happen, doesn't it? Because when we're young, we're simple creatures.
Yeah, I've got a nephew who went for David Seaman as a 3 or 4 year old, but he's the exception to the rule. Okay, we talked about the football. Should we get onto the musical soundtrack as we always do on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast? We try and look at the sort of social landscape. In fact, you've alluded us to a lot of how things have changed, but how the music has changed.
Was it Chicory Chip? Were they number 1? I can't remember.
They were
like
close.
that.
They were 3. They were number 3. And
All right.
it's just about to take to the football terraces because of Rodney Marsh going to Man City. Because then City start now, son of my father.
Yes, yeah,
Folded, I
Right.
was pre-formed pacts.
Look
Oh,
at
Rodney,
that.
Rodney
Yes,
Marsh.
yes, of course.
And that stuck.
Well,
for
and
50
and
That's a good
actually,
one.
that's a very interesting thing because I read an article quite a few years ago saying that there's a very distinct time when football chants changed from being based on hymns to being based on pop.
That's because
Yeah,
of rugby
by me,
internationals.
But yeah, it's what you know. And then it used to be adverts was the other thing. You know, tell me ma, and all that. I mean, Nice One Cyril was actually an advert for bread, wasn't it? If I remember rightly. You know, he was one of the bakers. But it's interesting how that moves, and of course that's also to do with. I talked about the commonality in the city, but that's to do with the commonality in the country because. You know, there were two television channels, you know, and everybody watched them and everybody knew all of the adverts. And so naturally it bleeds into football.
Yeah, it's when you look at the charts as well from those days, I think everybody would have known the songs in the charts. You may not know the position they're in. Without You, by the way, Nilsson is at number 1, but it was one of those songs that just resonated everywhere. And I look at those, certainly the top 3. American Pie, Don McLean. I think it was number 1 for ages and ages and ages. Can't remember, but it feels like everybody, even still today, Without You, American Pie, and Son of My Father, are 3 tunes that can still be sung by certainly anybody of that era. Those songs haven't gone away. And then you get the next 4 or so. Well, who cares about Blue's the Colour? Who cares about Beg, Steal or Borrow the New Seekers? Who cares about Michael Jackson's Got to Be There? Not a bad tune, the Michael Jackson, but it's until you get some mother and child reunion that you see.
Yes.
It's a really
Paul
interesting,
Simon.
really interesting song. It's a kind of Obladi, Oblada. I wouldn't call it white boy reggae, but certainly it alluded to a changing landscape, because the one thing I did notice from this match is that there are no black players. There's no black people in amongst the fans.
In fact, at that time, it would only have been if West Ham had got into the final that there wouldn't have been a black player because they had Eddie Coker and Clyde Best. But very few others.
Sure, but no fans either. None of the spectators.
No.
I mean, it was kind of like, that was a bit weird because I'd started going to football matches, probably 4 years before this myself at White Hart Lane. And I certainly do remember But you didn't even think about it. Actually, I probably don't remember that there were any black fans, but me and my brother were there representing, just that we didn't get on the telly. And Paul Simon's mother and child reunion is a kind of a cultural mix that you think, whoa, something's going on here, and you can't quite put your finger on what. He went to Jamaica to record it, so
it's a very Paul Simon thing to do, isn't it? Is to
South
borrow.
Africa.
I mean, and I think that was why Simon and Garfunkel were always destined to break up, because I think Art Garfunkel was very happy to stay in the place that he was, which is singing very clever but quite folky songs, and Paul Simon was always looking to change things.
You're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. I was on a plane flight many years ago from Finland, Helsinki, I think it was in Finland, to Stockholm, and Simon and Garfunkel had reunited. This would have been about 1980, 81 or something like that. They'd reunited for money, I guess, because they weren't talking to each other. And one was at the front of the flight, the other was at the back. They weren't communicating at all. I mean, it was sad, actually, because if you've been a fan,
you live in each other's pockets, and
they were best mates.
Facetious, but this is they grew up together. This is a true story that I did something for Comic Relief once, in which Roger de Courcy and Nookie and the Bear were doing it, and Roger de Courcy insisted they had separate cabs, which is absolutely staggering, isn't it?
It could be worse than that. There is one broadcaster who I won't name, and he's a good bloke, nothing wrong with that. But basically, producers have told me when they get on a flight with him, he goes to the left and they go to the right. Let me just leave it at that. But do
you think then that's quite interesting? What I was just thinking about black faces. Do you think there's a direct correlation between there being very few black faces on the pitch and there being very few, therefore, in the crowd? That's always the argument, isn't it? About I want to read about black characters like me growing up in a place that I grew up, or whatever it might be. Do you think that's a strong link?
I would in normal circumstances, but always anecdotally, what I remember is you just went where your friends went. You went where your friends went. So looking at this, I would say, although I don't know about Stoke so much, I know somebody who grew up in Stoke, and certainly he started watching Stoke when Garth Crooks started playing for Stoke.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine Garth may well have been at that game.
Well, yeah, he probably was. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. But he also definitely brought some blackface, or at least one blackface I know, to Stoke to start watching football. So I think that it applies. But what I remember is just you went where your mates went, even if you were going to racist discos, believe it or not. But all your mates, you were going out for a night out with your mates, or on a Saturday afternoon with your mates. That's why I started going to Tottenham, even though I didn't support Tottenham particularly. But every single person on my side of the street, because the other side were Gooners, on my side of the street went to White Hart Lane. So I didn't have any other choice.
And in terms of youth culture, of course, a lot of the black community suddenly found their place when West Indies were playing here, because the West Indies were murdering us for cricket, and the crowd was, predominantly, especially the Oval for Brixton and whatever of that. But of course, it's a joy to watch, people from the West Indies winning and winning so well. I mean, absolutely, not just winning, humiliating. But that was, I think, that to me, as coming from Stoke, which we didn't have a massive population, although Garth was brought up there, of immigrant families. To see those scenes at the Oval was amazing to me.
Remember the tin cans?
The
cans with the stones in them.
They brought a lot of colour. They brought a lot of colour. I mean, if cricket hadn't had that in those days, I think cricket would have probably fizzled out a lot earlier. But for me, coming from Nigeria, it wasn't so much cricket. It was boxing. It was Muhammad Ali specifically was the totem, if you like, that you looked up to. and he brought again a splash of color to everything. And it's not that you could afford to go to Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas, at the prices Don King was charging, but if you went to what was then called the Rainbow Theatre in Finsbury Park, which is now a Brazilian church and has been for many, many, many years now. But if you went there to see, because you could see the feed in the days when
yes,
the feed kind of went to the moon and then came back to us, and you paid about 100 quid for the privilege. You could see them there, and there were a lot of black people in those ones. Yeah, a lot, quite a few. See Muhammad Ali, old school people. I seem to remember, because we kids, they had a little fountain at the front where people used to chuck in coins for good luck, and guess who nicked all the coins? But anyway, I'm innocent. I've not admitted to any crimes. I've not admitted to anything. But let's go back to the charts before the old bills start knocking on my door.
What was the 9-year-old Nick Hancock listening to?
Oh, I think this is just. The first single I ever bought was Gene Genie, which I think was probably a year later.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So I think I wasn't quite there yet.
Yeah,
but you were being groomed for glam rock,
of course, because glam rock is knocking on this door of this chart. Sorry, Nick, to cut you. Glam rock is knocking on the flipping door of this chart.
Yeah. Are we a Tyrannosaurus Rex or just T-Rex by this point?
We're T.
Yeah.
Telegram Sam, it's definitely T. I think they should have still been Tyrannosaurus at this point, because I don't think it's at this point that he doesn't return John Peel's calls. I think it's a bit later than that.
But the hippy dippy do stuff has gone, isn't it? It's tight, it's
true.
Yeah. And then actually, in terms of glam rock, okay, it wouldn't be Gold Lame, but the massive bloody 19-inch flares and all that was very much the clothing of the terrace. That was and so on patches as well. It's one of my other memories for some reason.
And you see the hair start flowing, the locks start flowing of the footballers, don't you?
Yeah.
But you know,
everyone needs a haircut, don't they? All of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier about Peter Dobing, who was a pipe smoker and definitely belonged to the National Service war generation almost.
Yeah.
And then all the and the songs, because this was a massive generational change. You've got the 60s and all of that, but they would sing to George Best, Georgie Best superstar looks like a woman and he wears a bra, because he had long hair. That was these were the differences. You can imagine Laurie McMenemy playing with his chest pushed out in his Sergeant Major style fashion, and then some young kid comes into the club who's completely different. There must have been quite a clash of cultures, really, mustn't there?
You can see that from the three blokes that are introduced to the teams at the beginning. The three dignitaries, they just belong to the Victorian era or the Edwardian era, perhaps more precisely. When they're standing up to attention, I don't know if it's for the national anthem, you can't quite see, that generation of footballers. But it is interesting how every generation of footballers are denoted by the hair. They always try to follow a little bit of fashion. Going back to the pictures I've seen of the Busby Babes, 1958, they all look like Teddy Boys to me. Well, most of them did anyway, like Teddy Boys. Then you go to another generation, they start looking a little bit like the Beatles, and then another generation. Damn rock.
I think after the Beatles and around the time of glam rock, of course, the sideburns came in. They became the really important thing. Was to have Terry Connor, of course, had fantastic ginger hair. He used to have these great big mutton chop sideboards.
The ginger-haired afro on a footballer was something to behold, actually. No, it was one of the great.
Wallace at Coventry, wasn't it?
Did he have ginger hair? Okay, I can't remember.
Yeah, he played for Forest.
Massive.
Yeah.
You lot have got better memories than me. It's the glam rock is knocking on the door of this chart. So we do see the sweep with Pop and Joe at number 12. We mentioned T-Rex already. And
Slade.
Slade, yeah, Telegram Sam of T-Rex and Slade here at number 8.
I think it's one of their finest. It's kind of a bit low key. Track. It's less noisy, but I think it's one of their finest. Look what you done.
What you done. Do you remember that?
Oh right, yeah. They actually did have quite a lot of interesting other stuff, if you know what I mean. Quite soulful, well, not soulful.
Because I love you and all that.
Well, I think so. I think Noddy Holder's voice. It's an R&B voice, I think.
Yeah, yes, it is. Absolutely.
And it is, to be fair, to him, that is the voice, I think, in any case, of the Clash, the sound of the Clash. His voice just for me is very much like, gosh, what's his name of the Clash? He's a mate. Right? What was it?
George Eastham.
No, of the Clash.
No, not George. No, Joe Strummer, obviously.
Joe Strummer. I apologise because
well, you only forgot his name because it gives you a chance to say he invited me onto stage in Sweden.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. It's true. He put me on stage to support the Clash. Did you know that, Nick?
I supported you spend a lot of your time in Scandinavia. I've got to say, you're coming back from Helsinki 1 minute, then you're on the bloody stage with the Clash in Sweden.
I know. It was all go. It was all go. As Hugh Cornwell of the Stranglers once said, because he lived in Sweden, in the south of Sweden, he said, it's all quiet on the Eastern Front. That was his tribute to Sweden. It was kind of like that. But I studied there.
Oh, did you? Right.
But the point I wanted to make about Joe Strummer, if you listen to Noddy Holder, you kind of see where Joe Strummer gets it from. They both got a little bit of Little Richard about them. Don't get me wrong. Every singer is inspired by another singer, and then they do something special with it. Noddy Holder used a little bit too much echo for me, but he's got the voice that was the template, I think, for Joe Strummer, and for many other singers as well, by the way. And the idea of the Slade without him is just nonsense, because it's just all down to Dave Hill now.
Dave Hill was all of the glam rock in Slade. It was like he was dressed for glam rock, and the others were slightly embarrassed by it.
But having said that, we remember Dave Hill.
Yeah.
He had to be noticed. Who remembers the other two? Jimmy Lee, was it? And
he was a drummer, wasn't he? Jimmy,
he
was a bassist.
Yeah, the other guy that played the violin sometimes and the piano,
who wrote loads of the songs.
Yeah, exactly, with Noddy Holder. Yeah. But anyway, so I said that the glam rock's coming in here, but also a little bit of soul, the Chai Lights with...
I think what stands out for me is there's a lot of pop. And it's quite good pop. It's quite classy pop.
Yeah.
But I think because some people would see, I don't see it that way, but some people see 71 as being the great year. And everything is a kind of descent from 71 into the 70s. I don't quite, for me, the golden years are 66, 67, but you are clearly seeing more of a pop sensibility come in.
Yeah.
On the road, I think, to 70s schlock.
Yeah. Well, I think, when I was trying to think about what sort of music's around then, and one of my abiding memories is that there was always a novelty record in the top 20. Always something that wasn't quite what it purported to be, or was a winner from New Faces, or do you know what I mean, or something like that, or a young kid singing about his mother of mine. There just always seemed to be one of those there.
There's quite a few in this one. Let's start.
Is the streak there?
Not yet, but Brand New Key, Melanie. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yes, you see.
A novelty record straight away. You've already mentioned Blue is the Colour, novelty record, of course. I think there's one more here. Oh, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Yeah. I suppose kind of novelty because of the TV advert.
What's nice about Melanie is that not only is that a novelty record, it was out noveltied by the Wurzels, who then made it even more novel.
Of course, because there was Combine Harvester, wasn't it?
Harvester, yeah.
Of course, the best song in the chart for me is number 26, "Let's Stay Together," Al Green.
Obviously.
No arguments there. Mile, I would have thought. And this is the beginning of Our Green. I think he had a couple of tunes before this in the British charts, as I recall, maybe one or two, but it's within maybe 6 months of this, no more than a year, certainly, of this. He burst into the English charts for the first time. I don't think Let's Stay Together was the very first one, but as you can see there, it's been in the charts 7 weeks, only peaked at number 7. Sorry, it's been in the charts at this point 10 weeks, peaks at number 7. It was the tune, I think, that it stands out amongst all his tunes from this era. And, well, he just had it. Right place, right time, right backing musicians, right tunes that he was writing. He clearly had the muse on his shoulder day and night. And it's such a shame when you reflect on this charts that he didn't keep it going, because he should still be writing those songs. There you go. That is my memories of 1972. The Partridge Family are in the charts as well at number 25, one of those nights.
Oh, that's a novelty record straight away.
Of course, anything with David Cassidy is a novelty record.
And from a television programme.
Is Stoke winning a title? Does that count as a novelty as well?
Good point.
I see what you mean. Yeah, as in the League Cup. Yes, I could probably find something we've won in nearly every year, but you won't have heard of any of the things we've won. Like the Isle of Man tournament and things like that.
The Potteries Challenge.
Yeah, I noticed that the Stoke song doesn't get into the chart.
Did they release one?
They certainly did.
You're
they
joking.
certainly
You're
did.
Do you know it? Can you sing it?
I certainly. Well, I'm not in tune. They not only released one, they released a follow-up, which is a fantastic thing to do. So it was written by Tony Hatch and Jackie Trent.
Oh, wow.
Joking.
Quality.
Yeah. And Jackie Trent is called Jackie Trent because she's from Stoke-on-Trent. And so it was called We'll Be With You. And the players all sang along. And then they had a follow-up where they obviously decided the template was very good, called We'll Be Together. Okay. But there you go. Yeah. There you go.
Mate, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
I've loved it.
What do you miss most? Room 101 or They Think It's All Over?
Well, Room 101 never really went away. That's the good thing. Because after I did it and Paul did it and then Frank did it and now Paul's doing it again. And in fact, when I came up with that, and it was a real back of a fag packet idea, to think that now we're 33 years on, it's still in some format or another dragging its way through the airways. So I don't miss that so much. I miss They Think It's All Over, but only because, I'm a fan and I just got to meet loads of really important sports people. It wasn't really the job. It was just meeting all these people and going, I'm having a conversation with Richie Benno right at this very moment, or whoever it might have been. So I kind of miss that. Yeah.
It's what Dire Straits call money for nothing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes, if you're lucky.
Money for nothing in your chats with Richie Benno for free. That's a
yes, I was going to say, certainly never any chicks for free.
Finally, just remind us of the podcast again.
Oh yes, it's called The Famous Sloping Pitch, and it's just like this. It's just having a lovely chat, with like-minded people, which is great fun.
Let's do it again.
Cheers.
Thank you, mate.